Welcome to Food on the Mind, Awaken Genius. So glad to have you here, and so glad to be jumping into a topic that is pretty important to me, and that is the idea of emotional eating. Food on the Mind was really founded in order to help people who had found success losing weight in macro-based diets, but found themselves failing to maintain it or struggling even within the bounds of those dietary constraints. And what I found was that most people were struggling because they were eating outside of those quote-unquote rules, and it was predicated on emotion. It was not about food. It was not about lack of knowledge. And so I started delving deep into why people engage in behaviors that go against their goals. And emotional eating was kind of how I could wrap that all into one. It has obviously grown into be much more of a life coaching exercise, but at the end of the day, all of our behaviors are really just food on the mind. And that's where it all comes together. So today, we're going to talk about this concept of emotional eating. We're going to talk about what it is, why it happens, why you struggle with it, and how you can start to work through it. And how you can start to learn to do this without the idea of traditional dieting. It's not that traditional dieting is wrong or bad. It's just that it probably isn't working great for you. And so you might be able to do it in the future, but you're going to need to set yourself up from a place of safety. And that's what these tools can do. So with that, let's just start with the kind of concept that nobody really talks about, and that is the idea that emotional eating is not a food problem. Never has been. And yet, nearly every piece of advice out there tries to convince you that if you could just control what you eat, you'd be free from this struggle. But if you're listening to this, I'm guessing that hasn't worked out for you. And it's not because you're weak, you lack discipline, or you don't want it badly enough. It's because the entire approach is wrong. For years, decades, the dominant narrative around emotional eating has been that it's simply a failure of willpower, a bad habit that just needs to be broken. Now, you've probably heard the advice, like just keep the trigger foods out of your house, or try drinking water first to see if you're really hungry, or my personal favorite, just listen to your body. The problem is, this advice assumes that emotional eating is actually about the food, that if you could just remove the temptation, the problem would disappear. Anyone who's struggled with this cycle knows it doesn't work that way. Because here's what happens. You clean out your kitchen, you buy only safe foods, maybe even manage to stick to the plan for a while. Then something stressful happens. Bad day at work, an argument with your partner, or just that overwhelming sense of exhaustion from carrying the weight of everything in your life. And suddenly, food feels like the only thing that will bring you relief. It doesn't matter if it's in the house or not. You're gonna find a way. Maybe you order delivery. Maybe you stop at the grocery store. Maybe you eat an entire bag of something you don't even like that much just to take the edge off. And then shame kicks in. The self-judgment. The feeling that you're broken, that you just can't get it right. So what's really happening here? If it's not about food, then what is it about? It's about relief, regulation, escape. It's about the emotions and experiences you don't know how to hold. And food has become your coping mechanism. Emotional eating is what happens when your brain and body feel overwhelmed. And food has become the fastest, easiest, most accessible way to shift your state, even if only temporarily. And let's be real. It works. That's why you keep going back to it. Eating something comforting when you're stressed, bored, lonely, or exhausted does make you feel better in the moment. It's predictable, reliable, and it doesn't ask anything from you. That's exactly why it's so hard to stop. Because the alternative, the thing that diets and food-based interventions don't talk about, is that if you take away food as your primary coping tool, you're left with all the emotions, stress, and internal battles that you were trying to avoid in the first place. That's the real struggle. It's not about resisting cravings or avoiding certain foods. It's about figuring out how to exist with all the thoughts and all the feelings that make emotional eating feel necessary in the first place. And this struggle isn't just about stress or bad days. It's about history, patterns, the way you've learned to relate to yourself. If you've spent years, maybe even decades, using food as your primary way to soothe, numb, or escape, well, then of course it feels impossible to stop. It's not just a habit. It's a deeply ingrained response that has become a part of how you navigate the world. Maybe you grew up in a household where food was a source of comfort. Or maybe you were taught that emotions like anger or sadness weren't safe to express, so you learned to express them with food instead. Maybe your relationship with food has been shaped by years of dieting, restriction, and shame, creating a cycle where you swing between rigid control and feeling completely out of control. And let's not forget the role of exhaustion, because for many people, emotional eating isn't just about soothing emotions. It's about energy. It's about giving yourself something when you feel like you've given everything else away. If you spend all day taking care of everyone else, holding everything together, pushing through stress, obligations, and expectations, then food might be one of the only places where you allow yourself to actually receive something. So, if emotional eating isn't actually about food, then what's the real solution? That's exactly what we're going to unpack in this episode. So I'm going to walk you through why traditional fixes fail and how they actually make the cycle worse. I'm going to talk about what's really happening in your nervous system when emotional eating takes over and how to work with your body instead of against it. The hidden inner conflicts, the parts of you that are driving these patterns, and why fighting yourself never works. And then the key strategies to actually start breaking free without relying on willpower, restriction, or trying to control your cravings. By the end of this episode, my goal is for you to walk away with a completely new understanding of emotional eating, not as a problem you need to fix, but as a pattern you need to understand so that you can finally create real, lasting change. So if you've ever felt stuck in this cycle, if you've ever wondered why you can't just get it together when it comes to food, I want you to know this. You are not broken. You're not failing. And you're not alone in this. There is a way out. But it's not about food. It's about finally understanding what's really going on beneath the surface. So let's dive in. When people seek help for emotional eating, they're usually given advice that focuses entirely on food. Just track your meals or your macros. Make sure you don't keep the trigger foods in the house. Try eating mindfully. Drink a glass of water before you eat to check if you're actually hungry. Right? I say these things all the time to clients. And while well-intentioned, these approaches fail to address the root of emotional eating and often make people feel even worse. Because what happens when these strategies don't work? What happens when tracking meals becomes obsessive? When removing trigger foods just leads to finding substitutes? When mindfulness feels impossible in the midst of emotional turmoil? Well, people blame themselves. They assume that they're weak or lack discipline, but the reality is the problem isn't you. The problem is the framework you've been given. One of the most harmful myths surrounding emotional eating is that it is simply a matter of willpower. That if you just try hard enough, you can resist the urge to eat for emotional reasons. Let's break this down logically. Willpower is a limited resource. It's not an infinite well of self-control that you can tap into endlessly. The more decisions you have to make throughout the day, what to eat, how to respond to stress, whether to work out, the more drained your willpower becomes. And if you're relying on willpower alone to control emotional eating, you're setting yourself up for failure. Here's why. When you restrict yourself, especially in times of stress, your brain perceives it as a threat. The more you try to forcefully control food, the more urgent the cravings become. This is why restrictive diets almost always lead to binging. The body fights back against deprivation. Emotional eating is already a coping mechanism. So layering restriction and self-denial on top of it only amplifies the need to seek comfort through food. The diet industry has conditioned people to believe that if they could just find the right eating plan, they would be free from any kind of emotional eating or weight gain. But this overlooks a key truth. Most people who struggle with emotional eating aren't just eating because they like food. They're eating because food has become a way to cope. For many, food has been a constant in their lives, a source of comfort, a way to numb out, a way to regain a sense of control when everything else feels chaotic. And do things feel a little chaotic right now? When you take that coping mechanism away without offering an alternative, you leave people vulnerable, exposed, and without tools to manage their emotions in a sustainable way. This is why so many people feel trapped in the diet binge cycle. They start a diet determined to finally fix their eating habits. They restrict themselves, cutting out bad foods, limiting portions, or overhauling their eating patterns overnight. They experience emotional triggers, stress, loneliness, exhaustion, and the restriction starts to feel unbearable. They give in. Eating the foods they swore they wouldn't, often in large amounts, because the deprivation made them crave it more intensely. Then, they feel guilt and shame, promising to start over and be even stricter next time. And the cycle repeats. Each time this happens, the belief that they are failing or that they're failures gets reinforced, making it even harder to break free from emotional eating. But the issue isn't a lack of willpower. It's that the approach itself is fundamentally flawed. Another common piece of advice is to remove all trigger foods from your environment. The idea is that if you don't have access to these foods, you won't eat them. But the problem with this approach is that it only addresses the symptom, eating the food, not the cause, why you're craving it in the first place. So, what happens when you eliminate a food but don't address the underlying reason why you crave it? You obsess over it. You feel deprived, which intensifies cravings. You eventually give in and eat it in excess. Then you feel guilt, leading to more restriction. This cycle doesn't teach your brain how to respond to cravings in a healthy way. It just reinforces the idea that you can't be trusted around certain foods. True healing comes from learning how to be around these foods without fear, without guilt, and without needing them to regulate your emotions. Mindful eating is often suggested as a tool to help with emotional eating. I myself recommend it. And while it can be helpful, it is not a magical solution. Many people who struggle with emotional eating are already deeply aware of their behaviors. They know they're eating for emotional reasons. They know they're not physically hungry. The problem isn't awareness. It's what to do with that awareness. Mindful eating assumes that slowing down and paying attention to the experience of eating will help reduce overeating, which it can. But if you're using food as a coping mechanism, slowing down could actually make things more uncomfortable. When you try to eat mindfully but are dealing with emotional distress, the act of slowing down might heighten your awareness of the discomfort you were trying to avoid in the first place. So while mindfulness can be useful in certain contexts, it's not a complete solution for emotional eating. It has to be combined with strategies that address the underlying emotional drivers. The real solution to emotional eating isn't about restricting, avoiding, or using willpower to fight cravings. It's about understanding what's happening in your brain and body when the urge to eat emotionally arises, and learning how to regulate yourself in ways that don't rely on food. Emotional eating isn't a lack of control. It's a symptom of emotional dysregulation. And if we want to create real change, we need to focus less on controlling food and more on understanding the role food is playing in your life. So in the next section, we're going to explore what's actually happening in your nervous system when emotional eating takes over. Because once you understand that, everything starts to make sense. So if you've ever felt completely out of control around food, like something takes over and before you know it, you're knee-deep in snacks, it's not because you lack willpower, it's because your nervous system is driving the bus. So most approaches to emotional eating completely ignore this. And in fact, I've more recently come into this through work with a lot of friends of mine who work in either physical therapy, neuroscience, other fields within the fitness industry where they work very heavily on central nervous system and autonomic nervous system responses. Now, in fitness, though, we'll tell you just make better choices, be more mindful, without acknowledging that when emotional eating takes over, you're in a completely different state of mind. One where logic and reason are out the window and your body is making the decisions for you. So what I want to do now is I want to break down exactly what's happening inside your nervous system when emotional eating takes over. Because once you understand that, you can start working with your body instead of fighting against it. Our nervous system is responsible for how we respond to stress, emotions, and perceived threats. It has two primary states. A regulated state, safe and connected. When you're in this state, you feel calm, balanced, and in control. Food choices feel neutral, and you're able to listen to hunger and fullness cues without any emotional interference. We also have a dysregulated state, stressed and reactive. And when you're in this state, your body is looking for immediate relief. Food becomes an easy, accessible way to soothe discomfort and regain a sense of control. Now, these states are dictated by two key branches of the nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest mode. This is where you feel safe and calm and able to make thoughtful choices. And then we have the sympathetic nervous system, or the fight or flight mode. This is where your body perceives stress, triggering cravings for quick, high-reward foods to fix the discomfort. When emotional eating happens, it's because your nervous system is in a state of dysregulation, and it's trying to bring you back to safety as quickly as possible. When your brain detects stress, whether it's from work, relationships, exhaustion, or unresolved emotions, it shifts into a survival state. It doesn't care about long-term goals like balanced nutrition or mindful eating. It cares about getting you back to a regulated state fast. This is why stress makes you crave high-calorie, high-carb, or high-fat foods. Like carbs and sugar are going to provide a quick dopamine hit, momentarily calming the nervous system. Fat-rich foods are going to provide comfort and signal safety to the brain. And salty or crunchy foods help release pent-up tension, giving you a sense of relief. Your body isn't betraying you. It's actually trying to protect you in the only way it knows how. So, depending on the level of stress or emotional overwhelm you're experiencing, your body shifts into different nervous system states, each of which can influence emotional eating in different ways. So let's start with this fight or flight mode, the high stress response. When your brain perceives a threat, stress, anxiety, or overwhelm, it triggers adrenaline and cortisol. Your digestion slows down because your body prioritizes survival over food processing. Then cravings for quick energy foods increase because your brain thinks you need fuel to fight or flee. This often leads to mindless snacking, binge eating, or reaching for sugar and caffeine to sustain energy levels. Does that sound familiar? So next we have like our shutdown mode, which is the freeze response. This happens when stress becomes too much and your nervous system shuts down to protect you from overwhelm. You may feel emotionally numb, disconnected, or detached. Eating in this state often feels automatic, almost like you're on autopilot, zoning out while eating. People in this state often describe feeling checked out or not even tasting the food during an episode. Next, we have fawn mode, which is people-pleasing and suppression. This happens when your nervous system has been conditioned to avoid conflict by appeasing others. Emotional eating in this state often happens as a response to suppressing feelings or constantly prioritizing others over yourself. You may eat to reward yourself after a long day of caretaking, or to regain a sense of personal comfort after suppressing your needs all day. This is why relying on willpower alone doesn't work. If your nervous system is in fight or flight or shutdown mode, your brain isn't prioritizing logic. It's prioritizing survival. And when your brain thinks food is the fastest way to get you back to safety, no amount of just try harder is going to override that impulse. Instead, the key is to regulate your nervous system first. Once you bring your body out of a stress state, you regain access to rational thinking, making it easier to make food choices that actually align with what you want. So what's the alternative? Well, instead of trying to fight your urges, we have to start working with your nervous system. And here's how. Recognize your triggers. Before emotional eating starts, there's usually a moment where your body signals that it's dysregulated. Maybe it's a racing heart, shallow breathing, or tension in your body. Catching this early is key. Next, we want to practice nervous system regulation techniques. So instead of immediately turning to food, try some deep breathing exercises like box breathing or diaphragmatic breathing to signal safety to your nervous system. You can try grounding techniques like pressing your feet into the floor or holding something cold to bring yourself back to the present moment. And then you can try some movement-based regulation like shaking out tension or going for a short walk to shift out of fight or flight. Next, we want to work on trying to rewire your brain's response to stress. So over time, practicing these techniques consistently helps retrain your nervous system so food isn't the automatic response to stress. Hey there, it's Jeb. I want to take a quick moment to talk about something that might just change your life. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're someone who's ready for something different. Maybe you've been feeling stuck in your relationship with food, your body, or even your sense of self. Maybe you've tried all the diets, read all the books, and still feel like something's missing. That's where Food on the Mind comes in. At Food on the Mind, we don't believe in one-size-fits-all solutions. Instead, we focus on helping you understand the deeper why behind your struggles and giving you the tools to create real, sustainable change. Whether it's breaking free from emotional eating, building a healthier relationship with food, or recovering your confidence, we're here to guide you every step of the way. Working with me isn't about willpower or perfection. It's about curiosity, compassion, and transformation. Together, we'll dive into the practical tools and deeper insights that help you move forward, not just with food, but with life. And the best part, you don't have to figure it out on your own. With one-on-one coaching, group programs, and resources designed to fit your unique journey, Food on the Mind is here to help you step into your power and create a life that feels truly worth living. So if you're ready to take that first step, head over to my website at foodonthemind.com to learn more. Or connect with me on social media, Jeb Stuart Johnston. I'd love to hear from you and how I can support your journey. Because at the end of the day, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to start. And I'm here to help you do exactly that. This is why emotional eating isn't about food, it's about regulation. It's about how your nervous system responds to stress and emotions, and how food has become the fastest way to bring yourself back to balance. The good news? You can change this. You can teach your nervous system new ways to regulate without relying on food. And when you do, emotional eating starts to lose its power over you. Not because you controlled it, but because your body simply doesn't need it the way it used to. Next, we're going to explore the hidden inner conflicts, right? The parts of you that drive these patterns and why fighting yourself never works. So you already know that emotional eating isn't about food. You know that stress, emotions, and your nervous system play a huge role in why you reach for food when you're overwhelmed. But there's another piece that we need to talk about, and that's the hidden inner conflicts that keep you trapped in the cycle. Because here's the thing. If part of you genuinely wants to stop emotional eating, but another part of you keeps pulling you back into it, you're not dealing with a lack of discipline. You're dealing with an internal battle between different parts of yourself, each with their own needs, fears, and motivations. Until you understand and work with these conflicting parts, emotional eating will feel like an ongoing war within yourself. So in this section, we're going to uncover the hidden conflicts that drive emotional eating and why fighting yourself never works. One of the most frustrating things about emotional eating is that it feels like there are two versions of you. You know, inside of me there are two wolves meme. Like, that's it. There's the part of you that wants to be healthy, eat mindfully, and feel in control around food. And then there's the part of you that says, screw it, I deserve this, or I just need this to feel better. These two parts aren't random. They are opposing forces within your psyche, and they each have a distinct role in your relationship with food. So, in my work, we talk about these as demons, and you'll see that more. I explained it a little bit in some of the earlier episodes. But this idea is that we have these demons that we struggle with, but they are also our sources of genius. And so that's how I identify these parts. But with my clients, what I see that most commonly, there's probably three main parts that tend to show up. First is going to be that perfectionist, the real controller. And that's the part of you that believes you need to get it together around food. It's the voice that says, you shouldn't eat that. You need to be more disciplined. You're failing if you can't control yourself. This part's going to often push for those restrictive diets, the strict food rules, and that all or nothing thinking. It believes it's helping by trying to keep you in control. But its approach is rigid, and it's exhausting. There's also the emotional part, the soother. And this is the part of you that turns to food for comfort or relief or escape. It's the voice that says, I've had a hard day, I deserve this, or I just need something to take the edge off. This part doesn't care about long-term goals. It only cares about feeling better in the moment. It believes it's protecting you from stress, pain, and emotional overwhelm, even if the relief is temporary. And last, we have the inner critic, the punisher. This is the part that shames you after an emotional eating episode. It says things like, why do you always do this? You have no self-control. You'll never fix this. This part often comes in after binging, reinforcing guilt, shame, and the belief that you are out of control. It believes that by being harsh, it'll scare you into changing. But in reality, it just fuels the cycle of emotional eating. So, how do these parts keep you stuck? Well, these three parts often operate in a loop that keeps emotional eating alive. So the perfectionist takes control. You commit to eating clean, being disciplined, and fixing those habits. Stress, emotions, or exhaustion build up, and the emotional part starts looking for relief. Then, the emotional part takes over. You give in to cravings, emotional eating, or binging. Well, then, The inner critic punishes you. Shame, guilt, and self-blame set in, making you feel as if you failed. And then the perfectionist takes back control. You start over with even stricter rules, convinced you just need to try harder. And the cycle repeats. This isn't just a food thing. This is how I watch people live their lives. This is how we watch politics play out again and again. So if you've ever tried to just have more discipline or just stop emotional eating, you've probably felt like you were fighting against yourself. That's because you were. These different parts of you are constantly pulling in opposite directions. And here's the truth. You can't fight your way out of emotional eating. You have to understand and integrate these parts instead. Trying to shut down the emotional part or silence the inner critic won't work. It only makes these parts fight back harder. The real solution is learning how to work with these parts so that they aren't running the show. The key to breaking free from emotional eating isn't willpower or self-control. It's self-understanding and internal negotiation. Here's how to start working with these parts instead of against them. Recognize each part without judgment. When you feel a craving, pause and ask, which part of me is speaking right now? Is it the perfectionist setting unrealistic expectations? Is it the soother seeking comfort? Or is it the inner critic piling on shame? Acknowledge what each part wants. Each part has a reason for acting the way it does. The perfectionist wants control and structure. The emotional part wants relief and comfort. The inner critic wants you to change, even if its methods are harmful. Now we want to meet the need without using food. So instead of trying to silence the emotional part, ask, what else would help me feel safe and comforted? Instead of giving in to the inner critic, ask, what would actually help me change long term? Then we want to reframe the inner dialogue. Instead of saying, I can't believe I did this again, try saying, I see that a part of me needed comfort. What else could I try next time? And instead of saying, I just need to be more disciplined, try saying, I need to create balance between structure and flexibility. When you stop fighting yourself and start listening to the parts of you that are driving emotional eating, everything changes. You stop seeing yourself as broken or out of control and start seeing emotional eating for what it really is. An attempt to meet an unmet need. The goal isn't to eliminate these parts of you, it's to integrate them so that they work together, not against each other. When you do that, food stops feeling like a battleground and you start feeling in control again. Not because you forced yourself, but because you finally understand yourself. In the next section, we're going to cover the key strategies to actually start breaking free from this cycle. Not through restriction, but through building new patterns that truly support you. So to recap, so far we've uncovered why food-based solutions fail, how your nervous system keeps you stuck, and the hidden internal conflicts that fuel emotional eating. Now let's talk about the solution, what actually works. Because awareness alone isn't enough. Knowing that stress, emotions, and inner conflicts drive your eating patterns is just the first step. The real work comes in rewiring these patterns so that food is no longer the primary coping tool. In this section, I'm going to walk you through the key strategies that will help you break free from emotional eating, not through restriction or willpower, but by building a new relationship with your body, your emotions, and your internal parts. So step one, regulate before you redirect. If you've ever tried to just make a better choice in the moment, you know how impossible that feels when a craving's in full force. That's because in those moments you're dysregulated. Your nervous system is in survival mode and logic won't override that. So instead of forcing yourself to resist cravings, you need to first regulate your nervous system so that your brain actually has access to decision making. Here's how. We're going to do some deep breathing, like a simple practice like box breathing where you inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. That can signal safety to your nervous system. We'll try some grounding techniques, placing your feet firmly on the ground, splashing cold water on your face, or holding a warm mug can bring your body back to the present. And then some movement-based regulation. Shaking out tension, stretching, or even walking around for 2 minutes can shift your state before making a food decision. The key is not to fight the craving immediately, but first regulate your system. Once you feel calmer, you can make a choice from a place of clarity rather than urgency. Step 2 is just to reframe emotional eating as a message, not a failure. So most people view emotional eating as a failure, something they need to eliminate. But what if you saw it as information instead? Every craving, every binge, every urge to eat when you're not hungry is a message from your system. It's telling you that there is an unmet need, a stress that needs to be relieved, an emotion that needs to be processed, or exhaustion that needs to be acknowledged. Instead of asking, why do I always do this? Try asking, what is this craving trying to tell me? What do I actually need right now? If food weren't an option, what else might help me feel safe, calm, or comforted? This simple shift from judgment to curiosity starts to weaken the emotional charge around eating. Step number 3, develop alternative coping strategies that actually work. One of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to replace emotional eating with things that don't actually meet the same need. For example, someone might tell you, just take a bath when you're feeling stress. But if food is your primary comfort tool, a bath won't provide the same relief. Instead, you need strategies that actually fulfill the same function as emotional eating. Here are some examples. If emotional eating provides comfort, practice self-soothing techniques like wrapping yourself in a blanket, listening to calming music, or engaging in gentle touch, like rubbing your arms or neck. If emotional eating helps with emotional suppression, try expressive journaling, speaking your emotions out loud, or using art as an outlet. If emotional eating is about exhaustion, create mini rest rituals like lying down with your eyes closed for 5 minutes, stretching, or engaging in deep relaxation exercises. The goal is not to simply distract yourself from emotional eating, but to truly replace the function that food was serving. Step number 4, redefine your relationship with food. For many people, food is either seen as an enemy, something they need to control, or as an escape, something they use to cope. But food itself isn't the problem. The way you relate to it is. To heal emotional eating, you need to create a neutral relationship with food. This means no more good or bad foods. The more you restrict, the stronger the cravings become. When all foods are allowed, the urgency around them fades. You want permission to eat without guilt. If you remove the shame, you remove the rebellion. When you allow yourself to eat freely, food loses its power. And then trusting your body's signals. Your body knows what its needs, but years of dieting and emotional eating have drowned out those signals. The work is in relearning how to listen. Step number 5. We need to address the root cause, not just the symptom. Here is where the real transformation happens. Because at the end of the day, emotional eating isn't the issue. It's the symptom. I always say it's not the problem, it's the solution. If stress is the cause, you need stress management strategies. If self-worth issues are the cause, you need self-compassion work. If nervous system deregulation is the cause, you need regulation techniques. When you address what's underneath, emotional eating naturally starts to lose its grip. Remember that small steps create big changes. Breaking free from emotional eating isn't about willpower, self-control, or restriction. It's about understanding yourself on a deeper level and learning how to meet your needs in a new way. The goal isn't perfection, it's progress. It's about making one different choice at a time, building trust with yourself, and shifting your relationship with food from something you battle to something that simply exists as one part of your life. So take these steps, implement them one by one, and be patient with yourself. Because the more you learn to work with yourself instead of against yourself, the more freedom you'll find. So in the next section, we're going to explore the long-term mindset shifts that solidify these changes so that emotional eating no longer has a place in your life. Not because you fight it off, but because you simply don't need it anymore. So again, time to recap here. We've learned that emotional eating is about food, discovered how your nervous system plays a role, how your internal conflicts keep you stuck, and then we have some practical strategies to regulate your emotions and make new choices. But there's one more critical piece, and that's your mindset. Because here's the truth. If your mindset doesn't change, nothing else will stick long term. You can have all the strategies in the world, but if you still believe deep down that food is your only comfort, that change is too hard, or that you're destined to struggle forever, you'll keep falling back into the same patterns. So in this section, we're going to talk about the long-term mindset shifts that will allow you to move beyond emotional eating. Not through force, but because you simply no longer need it. Shift number 1, stop trying to fix yourself. One of the biggest mindset blocks that keeps people stuck in emotional eating is the belief that they are broken and need to be fixed. You might think, if I could just stop eating emotionally, I'd finally be okay. I just need more discipline, then I'll have control. I'm always going to struggle with food, I just have to try harder. But here's the reality. You don't need fixing, you need understanding. Emotional eating isn't a flaw, it's an adaptation. It's a strategy you developed to cope with stress, emotions, and unmet needs. And the key to healing isn't punishing yourself or trying to force control. It's learning to understand what those unmet needs are and how to address them in a new way. Mindset shift number 2 is to replace self-judgment with self-inquiry. When you emotionally eat, what's your immediate reaction? Do you judge yourself? You call yourself weak? You feel ashamed? Most people do. But judgment only keeps you stuck. It reinforces shame, which leads to more emotional distress, creating a cycle that drives more emotional eating. Instead of judgment, what if you replaced it with inquiry or curiosity? The next time you emotionally eat, instead of thinking, why do I always do this? I have no control. I'll never change. Try asking, what was I feeling right before I ate? What did I actually need in that moment? How could I meet that need differently next time? Shifting from judgment to curiosity takes the power away from emotionally eating and gives you the space to actually learn from it. And as we get into all the time on here, progress over perfection. One of the biggest reasons people stay stuck in emotional eating is perfectionism. Perfectionism says, if I can't do this perfectly, I might as well not try. One bad meal ruins everything, and I should never emotionally eat again if I'm really healed. But healing isn't about never emotionally eating again. It's about reducing the frequency and intensity over time. Progress looks like catching yourself before you binge, even if you still emotionally eat. It looks like choosing a different coping strategy, 1 out of 5 times instead of not at all. Feeling less guilt after eating instead of spiraling into self-hate. Perfectionism will tell you that imperfect progress isn't enough, but the truth is, small changes compound over time to create massive transformations. Shift number 4 is to stop using food as a measure of success. Most people measure their progress based on food choices. I didn't emotionally eat today, so I did great. Or I had a binge, so I failed. But food isn't the real measurement of success. It's just a symptom of deeper emotional patterns. True success looks like feeling less compulsive around food. It looks like recovering faster from an emotional eating episode. It looks like being kinder to yourself when you struggle, or feeling in control of your choices instead of reactive. If you only focus on how well you controlled food, you'll miss the bigger picture. Long-term freedom comes from shifting your focus to how you feel, how you react, and how you care for yourself. Shift number 5 is going to be emotional regulation over control. Most people try to control emotional eating through sheer discipline. They focus on meal plans, tracking, and restricting trigger foods, but we've already covered why that doesn't work. So the real solution? It's going to be emotional regulation. Instead of trying to control your food, focus on controlling your state. When you feel overwhelmed, focus on nervous system regulation instead of using food to numb. When you feel lonely, focus on connection instead of trying to fill the void with food. When you feel exhausted, focus on rest and self-care instead of pushing yourself harder. Food isn't the problem. It's just been your easiest tool. When you develop new regulation strategy, food naturally loses its grip on you. Real freedom comes from self-trust. Breaking free from emotional eating isn't about controlling food. It's about trusting yourself again. Trusting yourself means knowing that a bad day won't derail you. Trusting that your body knows what it needs. And believing that you don't have to fight food. You can just live. Freedom isn't about never emotionally eating again. It's about getting to a place where food no longer feels like a battle. Where it's just a part of your life, not your only coping tool. You're not broken. You're not failing. You're learning. And every step you take, no matter how small, is a step toward lasting change. So let's wrap up everything we've covered and talk about how to integrate these lessons into your daily life so that emotional eating becomes a thing of the past. Not because you forced it away, but because you don't need it. We've covered a lot. Right? We've unpacked traditional approaches fail, how nervous system plays a key role, the inner conflicts that drive emotional eating, practical strategies for breaking the cycle, and the long-term mindset shifts needed for true freedom. Now let's bring it all together, because here's the truth. Understanding all of this isn't enough. Knowledge is powerful, but real change happens when you integrate these lessons into your daily life. So in this final section, I want to give you a roadmap for how to apply everything we've covered so that emotional eating truly becomes a thing of the past, not, again, because you forced it away, because you generally don't need it. Build awareness in real time. That's the first step. It all starts with awareness. You can't change what you don't notice. But awareness isn't just about knowing that you emotionally eat. It's about catching it in real time and learning from it. So here's a simple process. Pause before eating. Before you emotionally eat, take a deep breath. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? What do I actually need? Observe patterns without judgment. Keep a journal or note in your phone tracking what's happening before you emotionally eat. Over time, you'll start to see patterns and triggers. Name the internal conflict. Ask yourself, which part of me is showing up right now? The perfectionist? The soother? The inner critic? Naming it helps you create distance from the impulse. Step 2 is to regulate before you react. So once you catch that emotional eating in real time, regulate your nervous system so that you have the capacity to make a different choice. Try one of these quick regulation techniques before making a food decision. You do 5-5-7 breathing. That's where you inhale for 5 seconds, hold for 5, exhale for 7. This signals safety to your brain. A cold water reset. You splash cold water on your face or hold an ice cube to interrupt stress patterns. I like putting your face in a bowl of ice water if you're not wearing makeup, or an ice pack on the back of the neck. Body movement. You can shake out tension, stretch, or take a quick walk to move energy through your system. And then self-soothing touch. Place your hand on your heart or gently rub your arms to create a sense of calm. Regulating first gives you a choice. You're no longer reacting impulsively, but you're now responding with awareness. Step 3 is to create an emotional toolkit. So one of the biggest reasons emotional eating feels automatic is that food is often the only coping tool available. To truly break free, you need other ways to meet your needs. So here's how to build your own emotional toolkit. If you eat for comfort, we're going to try those self-soothing rituals, right? Cozy blanket, music, aromatherapy, deep breathing. If you're eating for stress relief, we're going to try movement-based regulation, yoga, a short walk, dancing, shaking out tension. If you eat for connection, we're going to try reaching out, calling a friend, engaging in a supportive community, writing a letter to your future self. If you eat for reward, try meaningful rewards, a 5-minute break, watching a favorite show, journaling something you're proud of. Over time, these new coping strategies become automatic, and food loses its grip as your go-to relief. Step number 4 is going to be shifting your internal dialogue. The way you talk to yourself about emotional eating matters. If your inner dialogue is harsh and judgmental, it keeps you trapped in shame, which fuels more emotional eating. So instead of, I can't believe I did this again, I have no self-control, try, I see that a part of me needed comfort today. What can I learn from this? Instead of, I ruined my progress, I might as well keep eating, try, one moment doesn't define me. I can still take care of myself today. Self-compassion doesn't mean letting yourself off the hook. It means approaching yourself with kindness so you can actually learn and grow instead of staying stuck in shame. Step number 5 is to rewire your relationship with food. To make this change last, you need to transform your entire relationship with food. This means letting go of good and bad foods. All foods are neutral. It's how we use them that matters. Giving yourself unconditional permission to eat. When food is no longer forbidden, the urgency to overeat disappears. You want to focus on satisfaction, not restriction. The more satisfying your meals are, the less you'll feel the need to compensate later. And then trusting your body's signals. Emotional eating is a learned response, but so is intuitive eating. Your body knows what it needs. The work is relearning how to listen. Step 6, build identity-based change. So finally, to truly solidify this transformation, you're going to need to shift your quote-unquote identity. If you still see yourself as someone who struggles with emotional eating, that identity will continue to drive your behavior. So let's start affirming a new identity. I'm someone who listens to my body. I have multiple ways to regulate my emotions that don't involve food. I trust myself to make choices that support my well-being. The more you reinforce these beliefs, the more they become your reality. Over time, emotional eating stops being something you fight against and simply becomes something you no longer need. You're capable of lasting freedom. This journey, again, it's not about perfection. It's about deep transformation. It's about learning to work with yourself instead of against yourself. It's about releasing food as your primary coping mechanism and developing tools that truly support you. If you take nothing else from this episode, let it be this. You are not broken. You are not failing. You are learning. And with each small step, you're moving closer to a life where food is just food. No longer a source of guilt or obsession or emotional escape. Freedom isn't about fighting emotional eating. It's about getting to a place where it no longer controls you because you've learned how to meet your needs in ways that truly nourish you. This is your journey, and you're capable of lasting change. So, if this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to take the next step. Like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, please take a second to rate and review the show. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes. This helps more people discover this content and join this journey with us. You can join my email list. If you want deeper insights, strategies, or behind-the-scenes content I only share via email, sign up for my newsletter. I call it the Daily Bites. You'll get something every day, a little bit of inspiration to kind of get you going on the day. And then you'll get all the regular updates and exclusive content and first access to new resources to support your transformation. You can take the next step with my free mini course. If you're ready to start applying these principles right now, I've created a free mini course designed to help you take control of emotional eating and break free from food obsession. It's short, actionable, and packed with strategies you can start using it today. You can grab it now at the link below. And let's keep the conversation. I'd love to hear from you. Comment below if you're on YouTube, DM me on social media, or just reply to one of my emails. Let me know what resonated most with you in this episode. Thank you for being here, for doing this work, and for choosing to show up for yourself. Until next time, take care and keep moving forward. The awakening isn't a single moment. It's a lifelong practice. Awaken yourself. Awaken your genius. Awaken your power. Walk your path with intention, and I'll meet you along the way.